Mr. Tunde is the kind of man Lagos respected. Every weekday before dawn, he stood in front of the mirror in their Ikoyi apartment, adjusting his tie with calm precision. His suits were always neatly pressed, his shoes polished to a quiet shine. As a senior bank manager, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had climbed steadily and honestly, rung by rung, in a city that rewarded neither patience nor weakness. Mrs. Tunde watched him most mornings from the edge of the bed. While he prepared for work, she lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of their life together. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant horn of an early bus, the soft clink of his wristwatch as he fastened it. She rose a few minutes later, tying her headscarf and slipping into her nurse's uniform, white and spotless, the symbol of her own hard-earned success. She was the head nurse at Women Care Medical Center, a place filled with the cries of newborns and the tired smiles of new mothers. Every day, she helped bring life into the world. Every day, she smiled, encouraged, reassured. And every day, she carried a quiet ache that no one at the hospital could see. They left home early, sometimes without breakfast, because Lagos traffic showed no mercy. The roads swallowed hours, turning simple commutes into exhausting journeys. In the evenings, they returned late, drained, silent, and heavy with unspoken thoughts. Their conversations had become brief and practical. Did you eat? The light bill is due. I'll be late tomorrow. Love was still there, but it lived between the lines, buried beneath routine and fatigue. They had been married for 8 years. 8 years of shared prayers, shared meals, shared silence. 8 years without a child. In the early years of their marriage, the absence had felt harmless, even convenient. They told themselves they were still young, still building careers, still enjoying each other. Friends and relatives asked questions, but they smiled them away. God's time is the best, Mrs. Tunde would say, and she believed it then. But as the years passed, hope became something fragile. Mrs. Tunde had tried again and again to conceive. Each time, there was excitement, a missed period, a positive test, whispered prayers in the bathroom, tears of cautious joy. She would imagine tiny fingers, soft cries, a child calling her mummy. For 2 weeks, sometimes less, she allowed herself to dream. Then the bleeding would start. Every pregnancy ended the same way, 2 weeks in, like a cruel clockwork. Not late enough to announce. Not early enough to ignore. Just long enough to hope. She went through tests, scans, medications, and strict instructions. As a nurse, she understood the medical language, which made it worse. She knew the statistics. She knew the possibilities. She knew that sometimes, there were no answers. Each failure felt less like a medical condition and more like a personal rejection, her body quietly refusing to cooperate. With each loss, something inside her broke a little more. At the hospital, she was strong. She congratulated new mothers with practiced warmth, held babies for brief moments, and handed them back before anyone noticed how long she lingered. In private, she avoided the maternity ward when she could. The cries of newborns, once beautiful, now cut too deeply. At home, she grew quieter. Mr. Tunde noticed, though he did not always know what to say. He loved his wife deeply. He had never blamed her, never raised his voice, never compared her to anyone else. But he was a man raised to believe that problems should be fixed, and this was one problem he could not solve. No amount of money, influence, or discipline could change what was happening. Some nights, he reached for her in bed, only to find her turned away, eyes open in the darkness. Mrs. Tunde's spirit had been wounded in ways that were invisible but profound. Each failed pregnancy felt like a small funeral she had to attend alone. She smiled less. She prayed more, but with less certainty. The faith that once comforted her now felt like a test she kept failing. And though their home was beautiful, orderly, and full of signs of success, there was an emptiness that echoed in every room, an emptiness neither traffic nor work nor money could drown out. This was the life of Mr. and Mrs. Tunde. On the surface, they had everything. But beneath it all, something vital was missing, and it was slowly changing them in ways they did not yet understand. If the silence in Mr. and Mrs. Tunde's home had a sound, it would arrive with Mama Tunde. She came twice a week without fail, her presence announced long before she knocked. Her wrapper rustled like authority, her voice loud and confident, filling the living room as if it belonged to her. At the Lagos market, everyone knew her as Big Mama T, the the woman with 7 shops and a tongue sharp enough to cut prices in half. At home, she was simply Mama Tunde, mother, matriarch, and reminder. She never arrived empty-handed. There were always bags of fruits, smoked fish, or soup wrapped tightly in nylon. And then there were the songs. They were not songs in the joyful sense. They were old, familiar tunes, sung with exaggerated cheer, always ending the same way, grandchildren. She sang about bouncing babies on her back, about teaching little ones market songs, about a house that should be noisy by now. Mrs. Tunde had learned how to smile through them. She would nod politely, offer water, and pretend to be busy in the kitchen. Over time, the songs had become background noise, unwanted, unavoidable. But comfort never followed. Each lyric landed like a quiet insult, a reminder of what her body had failed to do. No one said her name directly, yet every word pointed at her. Mr. Tunde often tried to change the subject. He asked about the market, about sales, about rising prices. Mama Tunde always answered, then returned to singing. That afternoon, the heat was heavy, and the house felt smaller than usual. Mrs. Tunde sat quietly, folding laundry she had already folded once. Her mind drifted back to the losses, the 2-week hopes that had ended in blood and silence. She told herself to endure. She always did. Then Mama Tunde started again. Her voice rose confidently, louder than before, her eyes fixed on the walls as if the house itself needed the message. She sang about sacrifices mothers made and rewards children owed them. She sang about waiting too long. Something in Mr. Tunde snapped. "Please stop," he said, standing up. His voice was calm, but firm. Mama Tunde froze, then turned slowly toward him. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that warns of trouble. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Before the words could fully leave her mouth, Mr. Tunde stepped forward and covered it with his hand. His heart pounded. He had never done this before. Never raised his voice. Never crossed that line. "Leave," he said. "Now." Mama Tunde pulled away, shock flashing across her face before hardening into anger. She straightened her wrapper and pointed at him. "Be careful," she warned. "If you delay too long, you will become the scapegoat." She picked up her bag and walked out without another word. The door closed softly, but the damage remained. Mrs. Tunde, still at the kitchen crying, came out to see her husband leaving to drop Mama home, sat down in the sitting room trying to hide her emotions by clasping her hands together, searching for words, any words, that could explain what had just happened. Nothing came. The songs had stopped. But the echo had not. Later that evening, long after Mama Tunde had left the house, Mr. Tunde stood on the balcony, staring into the Lagos night. Traffic lights blinked in the distance, horns rising and falling like restless waves. He barely noticed his phone vibrating in his hand. It was a message. "Come outside. We need to talk." His chest tightened. He told Mrs. Tunde he needed fresh air and slipped out quietly. Mama Tunde sat in the back seat of her car, parked a short distance from the gate. The driver pretended not to listen. "You embarrassed me today," she said without greeting. "I did what I had to do," Mr. Tunde replied. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You think embarrassment is the problem? 8 years, Tunde. 8. He said nothing. "There are things you don't tell your wife," Mama Tunde continued. "Because she is too soft. Because love makes people blind." "What are you saying?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. She paused, then spoke slowly. "Some doors don't open with prayers alone. Some require offering." His stomach turned. "No. You will say no today," she said calmly. "You will think about it tomorrow. And when the time comes, you will remember my words." She fixed him with a steady look. "If you don't act, someone else will be chosen." Mr. Tunde stepped back, shaken. "Don't involve my wife." Mama Tunde smiled thinly. "She doesn't need to know. Not yet." The car pulled away, disappearing into the traffic. Inside the house, Mrs. Tunde lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unaware that a conversation had just taken place, one that would change her life forever. The 10th year arrived quietly, but it did not feel like a celebration. Preparations began weeks in advance. Mrs. Tunde supervised everything the way she supervised her life, carefully, politely, with a smile that hid too much. The caterer was booked. The decorations were chosen. Friends and colleagues confirmed attendance. On the surface, it looked like a milestone worth celebrating. Inside, she was uneasy. 10 years felt heavy. In Lagos, 10 years of marriage without a child was no longer a private matter. It was something people counted, whispered about, measured with their eyes. And Mama Tunde's words from weeks earlier had not faded. Mrs. Tunde feared the anniversary would become another stage for public shame. What if she says something? She asked one night, sitting on the edge of the bed. What if she blames me again? Mr. Tunde put his phone aside and held her hand. I won't let that happen, he said firmly. Today is about us. About you. She searched his face, looking for doubt, but found none. I love you, he added softly. With or without anything else. She nodded, comforted, but not fully convinced. Experience had taught her that reassurance did not always stop pain from coming. The day arrived with noise, color, and forced cheer. The hall filled quickly with guests, bank colleagues, hospital staff, family friends. Laughter rose easily. Music played. Plates were filled and refilled. To outsiders, Mr. and Mrs. Tunde looked like a perfect couple, successful, composed, admired. Mrs. Tunde wore a soft smile, greeting guests, thanking them for coming. Every hug came with a silent question she pretended not to hear. When it was time for speeches, Mr. Tunde stood up with confidence. He raised his glass and spoke clearly, proudly. He talked about partnership, patience, and growth. He praised his wife's strength, her kindness, her sacrifices. He called her his backbone. Applause followed. Some guests nodded approvingly. Mrs. Tunde blinked back tears, moved by his words. Then Mama Tunde stood up. Enough praise, she shouted with a laugh. We have heard sweet words. What we want now is grandchildren. The room erupted in laughter. Some clapped. Others exchanged knowing looks. Mrs. Tunde did not laugh. The sound hit her like a slap, sudden, public, unavoidable. She felt the room tilt slightly, her chest tightening as heat rushed to her face. She rose quietly and walked outside, needing air, needing distance, needing escape. Tunde noticed immediately and followed. Outside, away from music and voices, she finally let her tears fall. I'm tired, she whispered. I'm tired of being the joke. He pulled her close. You are not the problem, he said. Not today. Not ever. She leaned into him, breathing unevenly. For a moment, his arms felt like safety. The party ended well. Guests left satisfied. Compliments were exchanged. No scandal followed them home. But later that night, alone in their bedroom, Mrs. Tunde lay awake. Something had shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet crack inside her chest, a breaking she could not explain, but deeply felt. After the anniversary, life did not return to normal. It thinned out, like fabric worn too often in the same place. Mr. Tunde changed in small ways first. He started leaving for work late, something he had never done in years. Then there were days he did not go at all. When Mrs. Tunde asked, he blamed meetings, fatigue, pressure. She believed him because it sounded reasonable. Lagos work could drain even the strongest people. But the changes did not stop. He began coming home with the dull smell of alcohol on his breath. Not drunk enough to stumble, just enough to worry her. Some nights, he did not come home at all. She would call and call until he finally answered from a bar, his voice distant, unfocused. He said he needed space. He said he was thinking. Sometimes, he blacked out completely and remembered nothing the next day. Mrs. Tunde told herself it was stress. The bank. The expectations. The public embarrassment at the anniversary. She cooked his favorite meals, spoke gently, avoided hard questions. Love, she believed, was patience. 2 months passed like this. Then one night, everything broke its pattern. Tunde came home late, his eyes sharp, his movements restless. When she asked if he was okay, he snapped. His voice was louder than she had ever heard it. He walked past her, entered the bedroom, and locked the door behind him. She stood in the living room, stunned. The silence felt wrong. As she waited, her eyes caught a folded paper on the dining table. It was not there earlier. Her heart beat faster as she picked it up and opened it. Before she could think further, there was a knock at the door. Mama Tunde stood there. She did not greet Mrs. Tunde. She walked in as if she owned the space, carrying a small red cloth folded carefully in her hands. Her face was calm, almost satisfied. "I need to see my son," she said. Mrs. Tunde tried to speak, but Mama Tunde brushed past her and went straight to the bedroom door. She knocked once. It opened immediately. "Go outside," Mama Tunde said to Mrs. Tunde without turning. "This does not concern you." Confused and shaken, Mrs. Tunde obeyed. The door closed. 2 hours passed. Mrs. Tunde sat in the living room, staring at the wall, the paper still clutched in her hand. She heard muffled voices but could not make out the words. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts racing. When the door finally opened, Tunde stepped out. He was smiling. Not a tired smile. Not a forced one. A calm, relaxed smile. "Nothing happened," he said lightly. "You're overthinking." Mama Tunde was already gone. Mrs. Tunde looked at her husband, at the smile that did not reach his eyes, at the peace that had arrived too suddenly. She nodded. But deep inside, she knew. Something had happened. And whatever it was, it did not include her. The Saturday visit to the family house felt unavoidable. When Mama Tunde called and asked them to come to the family house, Mr. Tunde agreed too quickly. He said it was time to restore peace. Mrs. Tunde hesitated, but she followed. She had learned that refusing only created more tension, and after the strange night in their apartment, she was desperate for calm. The family house was busy when they arrived. Men gathered in the sitting room, uncles, cousins, family friends, talking loudly about politics, money, and football. Mr. Tunde joined them immediately, laughing a little too easily, as if trying to prove something. Mama Tunde did not waste time. She took Mrs. Tunde by the hand and led her into the kitchen. It was quieter there, the smell of spices and smoke hanging in the air. Sitting on a low stool was an elderly woman Mrs. Tunde had never seen before. Her back was bent, her hair grey, her eyes sharp and watchful. Mama Tunde did not introduce her. "This is my daughter-in-law," she said simply. The old woman nodded once and reached for a cup already prepared on the counter. The liquid inside was dark and thick, with a bitter smell that made Mrs. Tunde's stomach tighten. "It is for fertility," Mama Tunde said calmly. "Natural. Traditional. Many women have used it." Mrs. Tunde froze. She wanted to ask questions. She wanted to refuse. But the memory of Mama Tunde's anger, and her own years of disappointment pressed heavily on her chest. Fear made the decision for her. She took the cup and drank. The taste was unpleasant, sharp at the back of her throat. She fought the urge to gag and handed the cup back quickly. The elderly woman watched her closely, then looked away. Mama Tunde's face softened. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "For the songs. For the pressure. I was wrong." The word stunned Mrs. Tunde. "I only wanted the best for my family," Mama Tunde continued. "But I forgot that pain is not shared equally. From today, things will change." Something loosened inside Mrs. Tunde's chest. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not accused. Not mocked. Accepted. She nodded, tears threatening to fall. Mama Tunde squeezed her hand briefly, a rare gesture of warmth. When they returned to the sitting room, Mr. Tunde looked relieved to see them together. On the drive home, the car was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. Mrs. Tunde leaned her head against the window, exhausted but hopeful. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the apology. About the drink. About the possibility, however small, that this chapter of her life was ending. Maybe the struggle was over. Maybe the tension had finally lifted. She closed her eyes believing that peace had come, unaware that what she had swallowed in fear was only the beginning of something far more complicated. 8 months later, Mrs. Tunde stopped counting weeks and started counting breaths. The pregnancy had come quietly, without ceremony. No sudden joy, no loud announcement. Just a missed period, then another. A test taken alone in the bathroom at dawn. 2 lines appeared, clear and steady. She sat on the floor and cried, not from happiness at first, but from fear. She had seen hope die before. This time, it did not. The weeks passed. Then months. Every scan showed progress. Every appointment ended with cautious smiles. Her body held on. The baby stayed. The labor came on a rainy night. It was long, exhausting, and frightening. But when the cry finally filled the room, strong and loud, everything else faded. The nurse placed the baby in her arms. A boy. Healthy. Warm. Real. Mrs. Tunde laughed and cried at the same time. Her hands trembled as she touched his tiny fingers. This was not a dream. This was her child. Years of waiting, loss, and humiliation collapsed into that one moment. Mama Tunde arrived before dawn. She danced quietly in the corridor, tears streaming down her face. She thanked God loudly. She called relatives and announced the news with pride. "A strong boy," she said. "My grandson." Mrs. Tunde watched her carefully, unsure how to feel. Gratitude mixed with unease, like joy resting on unstable ground. When they returned home, the house filled with visitors, gifts, and noise. Everyone wanted to see the baby. Everyone had advice. Everyone had opinions. Mrs. Tunde barely slept, but she did not complain. She held her son close, memorizing his smell, his sounds, the weight of him against her chest. Then Mama Tunde spoke. "The child must go to the village," she said casually one afternoon. "Just for a while." Mrs. Tunde froze. "No." Mama Tunde laughed lightly. "It is tradition. He must be presented properly." "No," Mrs. Tunde repeated, firmer this time. "He is too young. He stays with me." The room grew quiet. Mama Tunde turned to her son. "Tunde." He said nothing. Mrs. Tunde looked at her husband, waiting. Hoping. He stared at the floor, silent. That silence hurt more than the demand. Later that night, Mrs. Tunde lay awake, listening to her baby breathe. Her chest felt tight. Something about the request did not sit right. She remembered the drink. The apology. The sudden change. Fear stirred where trust had been growing. She overheard voices in the backyard. Mama Tunde's voice was low, urgent. "If the child is not taken, this family will be ruined." Mrs. Tunde's heart stopped. "Everything has a condition," Mama Tunde continued. "You know what was agreed." Mrs. Tunde stepped back quietly, her hands shaking. "Ruined." The word echoed in her head all night. She held her baby tighter than before, her mind racing. What agreement? What condition? What did any of this have to do with her son? That night she looked at Tunde, sleeping beside her, his face calm, almost peaceful. He did not look like a man burdened by truth. He looked like a man hiding from it. For the first time since the baby's birth, joy gave way to dread. Something had been done. Something had been promised. And whatever it was coming for her child. After what Mrs. Tunde heard that night, rest became impossible. She moved through the days like someone carrying a secret too heavy for her body. She fed her baby, smiled at visitors, answered phone calls, but her mind was elsewhere. At night, when the house was quiet and the baby slept, she lay awake replaying Mama Tunde's words again and again. "If the child is not taken, this family will be ruined." Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing happened. No sudden visit. No forceful demand. That silence frightened her more than noise would have. She watched her husband closely, how he avoided her eyes sometimes, how he grew tense whenever Mama Tunde called, how he spoke too quickly when she asked simple questions. Something was being hidden. And she could not live with not knowing. One evening, as Tunde dressed for his usual basketball practice, Mrs. Tunde sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at nothing. Her baby slept nearby. Tunde tied his sneakers, then paused. "What's wrong?" he asked, moving closer. "You've been far away these days." She swallowed. Her heart pounded. "We need to talk." He froze. Slowly, he sat down across from her. The air between them felt thick, heavy with years of unspoken things. "I heard Mama," she said quietly. "I heard her say the child must be taken. I heard her say the family will be ruined." Tunde's face drained of color. "You misunderstood." "Don't lie to me," she cut in, her voice shaking but firm. "I asked Uncle Dele. He told me everything." Silence crashed into the room. Tunde dropped his head into his hands. After a long moment, he slid off the chair and knelt in front of her. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I wanted to protect you. Her chest tightened. From what? Mrs. Tunde says angrily. He looked up at her, tears in his eyes. My family, the sacrifices. The words felt unreal, like something from a story she would never believe, if it wasn't her life. Mama sacrificed her first son, he continued. To my elder brother. The uncles did the same. It's how they believe success is sustained. Mrs. Tunde felt cold all over. I tried to stop it, he rushed on. That's why I didn't want you to get pregnant. I thought if there was no child, there would be nothing to take. I never planned for you to drink anything. I swear. Her mind flashed to the kitchen. The elderly woman. The bitter drink. I love you, he said desperately. I love you more than anything. That's why I'm telling you now. She stared at him, her world tilting. We can relocate, he added quickly. Another state. Far away. Mama won't find us. We'll start fresh. For a moment, Mrs. Tunde could not breathe. Then she stood up, pulled him to his feet, and hugged him tightly. Okay, she whispered. We'll relocate. Tunde sagged with relief, holding her like a man saved from drowning. Thank you, he murmured. Thank you for forgiving me. She said nothing more. That night, as he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Mrs. Tunde lay awake beside him, her baby between them. She stared into the darkness, her hand resting protectively on her son's chest, feeling each tiny breath. Relocation might delay the danger, but it would not erase it. Deep inside, Mrs. Tunde was already planning something else. Something final. Something only a mother pushed to the edge could do. After the confession, Mrs. Tunde became calm. Too calm. She woke early every morning and returned to old routines with surprising ease. She cooked Tunde's favorite meals, pepper soup on some nights, jollof rice on others. She asked about his day. She laughed softly at his jokes. She hugged him from behind while he brushed his teeth, resting her head briefly on his back like she used to. To anyone watching, healing had begun. Tunde noticed the change almost immediately. The tension in the house eased. The silence that once felt dangerous now felt gentle. He slept better. He stopped drinking. He even began planning logistics for relocation, checking job transfers, speaking to agents, dreaming aloud about a quieter life somewhere far from Lagos. He believed she had forgiven him. And in a way, she had. Mrs. Tunde listened patiently whenever he spoke about the future. She nodded when he explained timelines. She reassured him when guilt resurfaced. We'll be fine, she said often. We're together. Her smile never faltered. But when she was alone, it vanished. At night, after Tunde fell asleep, she lay awake with her son in her arms. She studied his face closely, memorizing every detail, the curve of his lips, the way his eyebrows moved when he dreamed, the tiny sounds he made in his sleep. She whispered promises into his ear, promises no one else could hear. I won't let them take you, she said silently. Never. Each smile she gave Tunde was intentional. Each hug was deliberate. She reassured him not because she was weak, but because she needed him calm. She needed him trusting. Panic would ruin everything. Guilt would raise questions. Suspicion would attract attention. So she smiled. She packed baby clothes carefully. She washed and rewrote lists. She organized documents. She even joked once about how Mama Tunde would complain about the relocation. Tunde laughed, relieved that the tension was finally over. What he did not know was that Mrs. Tunde had already crossed a line inside her mind. Forgiveness did not mean surrender. Acceptance did not mean obedience. She had accepted the truth, but she refused its outcome. One afternoon, while rocking her baby, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked ordinary. Tired, maybe. But there was something new in her eyes, focus. Resolve. The look of someone who had stopped asking for permission. The smile returned as Tunde walked into the room. You look happy, he said. She nodded. I am. And in that moment, it was true. Not because the danger had passed, but because the decision had already been made. The house felt unusually quiet when Tunde returned that night from work. He didn't think much of it at first. Lagos traffic had drained him, and his mind was still wrapped around work and relocation plans. He dropped his bag by the door and glanced around. No sound from the kitchen. No soft humming from the bedroom. No baby's cry. She probably went out, he muttered to himself. Maybe a short walk. Maybe quick shopping. Mrs. Tunde, Tai, as he once called her with ease, had been doing that more often lately. He headed straight for the bathroom. The hot water washed the day off him. For a few minutes, he felt calm. Relieved, even. He believed the hardest part was over. She had forgiven him. They were moving forward. That smile of hers had convinced him. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, the silence felt louder. He checked the time. 9 p.m. Too late. He reached for his phone and dialed her number. It rang. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. His chest tightened. He scanned the living room again, this time more carefully. That was when he saw it. An envelope sat neatly on the center table. On top of it were his car keys. His heart began to race. He picked up the envelope with shaking hands. His name was written clearly across the front. No shaking handwriting. No tears smeared on the paper. Just firm, deliberate strokes. He opened it. Tunde. The man I called my husband. The man I fell in love with at the university. You have failed me. And you have failed your son. His breath caught. I know now that the relocation plan was never real. It was only another delay. Another lie you needed me to believe so your family could prepare. I played along so mine could work. Tunde sank onto the sofa. I want you to know this. I never drank the fertility drink at the family house. His head snapped up. I was already 2 weeks pregnant before that visit. The room spun. So whatever deal your family made, whatever sacrifice they believe they secured, it did not come from that drink. It came from lies. Tunde felt something break inside him. You chose tradition over family. You chose fear over love. You chose silence over protecting your wife and child. He clenched the paper tightly. Divorce papers are on the counter. By the time you read this, I will be gone with my son. We will never be part of that life. Do not look for us. Do not involve your mother. Do not lie to yourself that you can fix this. You already chose. Tai. The letter slipped from his hands. He stood up slowly, moving like a man underwater. He walked to the kitchen. The papers were there, exactly where she said they would be. Signed. Neat. Final. He called her name. No answer. He ran to the bedroom. The wardrobe was half empty. Baby clothes were gone. The crib was bare. The air smelled faintly of baby powder and something final. Tunde dropped to the edge of the bed, his hands on his head. For the first time, the truth hit him fully, not the truth of his family's rituals, not the truth of sacrifice, but the truth of loss. He had mistaken her smile for forgiveness. He had mistaken her calm for surrender. And now, the woman who once carried his shame quietly had taken her strength and walked away, without noise, without begging, without looking back. The house had never felt so empty. And this time, no tradition could fill it. The first thing Tunde lost was control. He still woke up early out of habit, still ironed his shirts, still sat in traffic, but there was nowhere meaningful to go. The bank called it restructuring. He called it punishment. Years of loyalty disappeared in a single meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. No shouting. No drama. Just a polite dismissal and a handshake that felt hollow. He walked out carrying a box of personal items and a weight he had never known. At home, there was no one to tell. Mima Tunde's world collapsed next. One night, fire tore through the market. 7 shops, years of sweat, shouting, bargaining, dominance, burned to ash. People gathered. Phones recorded. Neighbors whispered. Some said it was electrical fault. Some said it was coincidence. Mima Tunde said nothing. She sat on a plastic chair the next morning, staring at smoke-stained hands, rocking slightly as if soothing a child no one could see. The woman who once sang loudly now barely spoke. The authority in her voice had vanished. With no income, no savings left untouched, they moved. The big house went first. Then the cars. Then pride. They ended up in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. Thin walls. Flickering lights. Neighbors who did not know their names and did not care to learn them. Mother and son shared silence like strangers forced into proximity. Life became unbearable in quiet ways. Mima Tunde complained constantly, about pain, about hunger, about destiny. Tunde stopped responding. He slept on the floor some nights, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked and spun. Other nights, he did not sleep at all. He thought about Tai Tai. About the way she used to laugh when they were younger. About how she listened more than she spoke. About the strength he mistook for weakness. He tried to find her. He called old friends. He visited hospitals. He asked quietly, carefully. No one knew anything. It was as if she had dissolved into the world, carrying their son with her like a secret. Months passed. No messages. No sightings. No mistakes. Tai Tai had vanished completely. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Tunde imagined hearing a baby cry. Other times, he dreamed of a boy running toward him, stopping just out of reach. He woke each time with his chest tight, his mouth dry, his hands empty. Mima Tunde aged quickly. Without her shops, without her influence, she was just another old woman with regrets she could not return. One evening, she broke down and said, "I only wanted the family to continue." Tunde said nothing. Because he finally understood something she never would. Family was never about continuation alone. It was about protection. And they had failed. Far away, in a place no one could trace, Tai Tai built a new life quietly. She chose anonymity over explanation. Safety over recognition. Love over tradition. She raised her son without songs that hurt, without conditions, without fear of what night might bring. She did not teach him where he came from, not yet. She taught him how to breathe freely, how to sleep peacefully, how to grow without being owed to anyone. She had walked away not because she was weak, but because she was brave. Back in the one-bedroom apartment, Tunde sat alone one evening, holding nothing but memories. He finally cried, not loud, not dramatically, but deeply, the way men cry when it is too late to be heard. What remained of him was not anger. It was understanding. Understanding that some traditions are born from fear, not wisdom. That silence can be more violent than words. That love does not survive sacrifice when the sacrifice is innocent. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love is leaving, before the damage becomes irreversible. Some traditions protect families. Some destroy them. And sometimes, love survives only when someone is brave enough to walk away. If you enjoy deep storytelling, African family drama, and stories that stay with you long after the video ends, you're in the right place. New episodes uploaded regularly. Subscribe, like, share, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Thanks for watching.